Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner and essay grader, and full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Jay Bryant with ETS back with us, and Jay, really excited to have you on the show to talk MBA admissions. Would love if you could share your background with the audience.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Tyler. Hi, everybody. Jay Bryant here. Currently, I do work for ETS, which is the organization that created and gives the GRE exam, which I'm sure many of you are excited about taking. Um, so I've been with ETS for 5 years now. My job is specifically working with business schools. My primary region is basically, to make it simple, Mississippi River and West in the United States. So that covers Texas, which is where I'm located now, California, Washington, Oklahoma, Utah, you name it. All the states that are west of the Mississippi, I do work with those business schools, not just on the GRE, but all of our products. We do some other stuff behind the scenes that you may not see quite as much as the GRE, but they are certainly there. Prior to joining ETS, and the reason why I have this position is because I have almost 2 decades in universities on campus, being director of admissions. I
Hmm.
started by getting my MBA, early 2000s. Went to Thunderbird School of Global Management, which is part of Arizona State. Arizona State actually has two different business schools, if you didn't know. Um, but Thunderbird is focused on international business, international relations. At that point, they still offered MBAs. Right now, it's a little bit different. But I got my MBA from there, and and upon graduation, I had been a high school teacher prior to that. So they asked me to come join in because my background in education and understanding education, along with a degree in marketing, hey, you could do marketing for an educational institution, which is what I
Right.
did. That's how that all started. Wound up taking over before too long the recruitment for the entire school, which was all the different type of business programs, everything from finance to executive MBA. All of those kind of fell under the recruiting side, and before long, also took over admissions as well. Spent
Hmm.
a decade there, then moved over to the University of California in San Diego, the Rady School of Management. Very similar job there, overseeing recruitment and admissions. Throughout that time, I presented numerous times at conferences, our industry conferences and whatnot, and got to know colleagues throughout the industry really well. My closest friends are admissions people from the business school world. That's I didn't expect that. That wasn't on my life bingo card, but there it is. So these are people not only that I know professionally, but personally. So, and yeah, sometimes we'll have a cocktail and talk about admissions in business school. So this is just my life, I
Shared passions, right?
yeah, it is. So it's something I do. I've given, I've recruited in 60 different countries, and that's very exciting. Getting work for such international industry. Basically, I've traveled to every continent except Australia. I never got to go to Australia doing recruiting, but I've worked with students from all over. I've interviewed thousands of MBA candidates. Um, at the two different schools I worked at. And since I've been at ETS, I work directly with the admissions offices and make sure that ETS and the GRE is providing for them what they want and need, and
Hmm.
kind of hearing on their end how things are going. Kind of on a, hey, I know you. I've been in your position. What's the real word on the street? What are the good and the bad happening out there right now? And what should candidates do?
Right.
So,
Yeah, and it's rare that somebody has such a good inside baseball perspective, right? Because you've kind of been on both sides of it, right? I was lucky enough in my career to have that in my previous life. In my past life, I worked in marketing in the video game industry, and I first started out selling to them, and then I flipped over and was on the inside doing the marketing and having like the perspective of both,
Hmm.
right? Where it's like you were in MBA admissions and now you're not, now you're on the other side of the table for that. Really is a unique perspective and it's kind of fun,
Well,
right? You kind of know what their problems are a little bit, so you can talk shop in a way that like most people can't.
awesome. Yeah, interesting to know. We'll have to do another podcast. I'm a gamer in free time.
Oh,
So,
cool.
so we could certainly speak for hours on that one as well.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be fun. I don't know if the GRE snacks people would want to hear about it, but I think that'd be great. So yeah, I think today we're going to be, given your unique perspective, and the fact that, yeah, you also your unique access, right, to just all sort of what's going on in the world. How are, what's the big headlines for MBA admissions going into 2025? Like, what are the sort of the state of I don't want to say state of the union, like the state of MBA
Sure,
admissions.
sure. A lot of things I'm hearing right now, we are, the whole world got scrambled during the COVID time.
Hmm.
One could argue we're still in COVID time because it still exists, but for the most part,
Well, right.
we're landing on the post-COVID society, and a lot has changed. The way that even the way schools are interacting and recruiting, probably a lot more online recruiting than the traveling that I did. I said I went to 60 countries. I don't think I'd have the same career recruiting now as I did 20 years ago,
Hmm.
because you're going to find so much online activity there. The marketplace has changed a lot of who is looking for degrees.
Hmm.
Thinking back to when I was starting in the industry, we were bringing in so many excellent students from China and India. Well, now
Hmm.
those individuals have graduated. A lot of them got PhDs and are working at universities in China and India, which means that they've got some really great talent in schools there. So that's kind
Right.
of changed. Uh, Africa has,
Well, and particularly like at least I don't know about India as much, but I know that in China, like just it's kind of like education is the most important or one of the most important things for kids growing up, right? So there's this emphasis on it culturally too.
yeah, absolutely. If you think that the acceptance rate at Harvard or MIT or Stanford are really tough, there
Hmm.
are schools in India, business schools, that it's 10 times tougher to get in than even Harvard or MIT here in the US. So there's just such an interest in education there. They've got some really amazing schools. So that's been a shift in kind of population moving around the globe. We do see Africa on the rise, Ghana and Nigeria for sure. More and more students coming from there every year. Some schools I'm hearing
Hmm.
the number one international application group is actually Africa currently. It's not what I experienced 20 years
Wow.
ago of China or India. It's actually African applications. So,
Right. And I mean, the thing that always strikes me when I talk to people from Nigeria is like everybody's English is pretty much at the same level that you'd find in China or India or Southeast Asia, right?
right.
So it's definitely like not, I only say that not that English is better, but just that English is the language you would need to speak to apply to an MBA program, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
like an English speaking MBA program.
And
Yeah.
I've always thought it's interesting. Being in education, you're you're a bit ahead of the curve of what's going to happen in the future. So where we are
Right.
today, I was thinking back in the early 2000s when I first started in admissions. Wow, we're really educating a different part of the world. How does that affect 20 years from now? And here we are. Both India and China have changed dramatically. I was just in India about 2 months ago. Um, it has changed so much since my first time going there. It's really developed. It's great to see and seeing so many people from Africa coming now. I'm like, oh, this is really good for the
Mhm.
future of Africa as well.
Yeah. Well, it's just like you said. What happened with like China and India is, well, those people come back, right? And then they take that education and use it to develop programs in their own country. And then that kind of raises the bar for the next generation of the people in that country. And then the cycle continues.
Exactly. So yeah, we might be back here in 10 years talking about how to get into business school in Ahmedabad for all I know.
Right.
As opposed to me working with the region on the Western U.S., I might be working over there. So we'll see. Interesting
Yeah.
things going on.
Yeah, it's very cool. So yeah, definitely. I mean, international is a big trend. I'm curious. I mean, I feel like I've heard, and I'm sure that the data backs it up somewhere. Just that because of, for lack of a better word, like the tech recession, like there's, you know, we're in San Francisco, like we're a tech company. It's been tough, right? A lot of people got laid off. There was, it's a long story and we don't need to get into it, but like tech hired a lot of people during COVID because COVID kind of seemed like the world was going to be forever changed. And then it kind of came back from that a little bit, right?
Hmm.
We're certainly further into a digital future than we were, but we're not 24/7 on our computers like we were in the pandemic. Um, and so a lot of people went to business school this year or applied at least because they, were kind of out of a job for a long period of time. Is that something you've heard? And do you see that continuing into 2025?
Oh, I'm going to be very frank. And in about today, by the way, today is Halloween that we're recording. And a big event is coming up next Tuesday. Whichever
Right,
side of
yes,
that
which
you're
might make it,
on doesn't
yeah,
matter to me in this. But there's going to be effects from whatever happens with the election. Just
yes,
it
exactly.
is the way, and I certainly can't predict that. I don't think even the polls can't predict where that's going at this point.
Yep.
So ask me next week, and I might have some different opinions if we even have results at this time next week. Um,
Hmm.
but I mean, it's a cycle. Having been in this industry now for over 2 decades. I went through the 2008 recession. And some schools were like, this is, great for us because students are coming back. It's like, hey,
Hmm.
I've lost my job. It's a great time to go to school. We didn't experience that at my school as much as other schools did because we were a different type of school.
Right.
Where, doing the more global focus at that point. Um, so it's really hard to say where the economy is going to be. There is a trend in general that when there's a recession or something, individuals do choose to go and upgrade their skills by going back to school. There's also, there's a big turn to smaller programs as well, certificates and micro credentials and whatnot. And not everyone's going for a degree. They're like, I just need to know these things in finance over here, and I'm going to go take some finance courses, get certified on this, that, or the other. And so
Yeah, and
education
then
is going,
there's the trade schools, right? And like that whole vein of things. I mean, I think it is necessary for education to not just be a monolithic like walk with only one path, right? So I'm glad for that. But yeah, it definitely is gonna be for people that for people and institutions that were on that path, it's gonna be a change.
right. Yeah, and one of the interesting things I get to do in this position is represent ETS and the GRE at various conferences. I think it was 2 to 3 weeks ago, I was at the Western Deans Conference here in the United States. And that's where
Hmm.
deans from uh, basically think Arizona, Utah, and West, kind of
Hmm.
the West Coast schools. The deans get together in a big room. So there was about 50 or 60 deans and myself and a few other organizations that work with them, hearing what they're talking about because they are frankly the CEOs of their business school and
Right.
learning about AI and learning about and there's a lot of this global conversation of where are students going to be coming from, what do they need to know. There's
Yeah, what's relevant for the next, decade of business, right?
Right. There's a population decrease cliff that's been called in the industry where we're facing a time where simply there are less people coming up that are MBA age in the next few
Yes.
years, and business schools are aware of this, and they're also
hmm
trying to figure out, I'm a Gen Xer. How do we talk to Gen Z? We took years to figure out millennials. Now we got to figure out Gen Z. All of these
Right.
things the schools are thinking about and seeing it coming. And hey, a population cliff actually may be advantageous for those that are applying because there's less applicants in the overall
Right.
population.
Well, and on that note, one of the things that I found really interesting, because I read your guys' ETS GRE report every year,
Mm-hmm.
and something I always found fascinating about it is like the just super low percentage of people over 35 to go to business school. It's like less than 3%
Right.
of the total population. And I wonder if that might change a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, that'd certainly be helpful because, yeah, the millennials are this huge bulge generation.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gen Z was smaller, and then Gen Alpha is even smaller than that, right? So suddenly we're running into the same kind of demographic challenges as like Europe, and Japan, just, 30-ish years later, because we had the millennials kind of as like the millennials were a unique, were a unique generation in the developed world
And
for
yeah,
its
and
time.
it's hard to believe because when I started, we were just starting to talk about millennials are starting to trickle into grad school. Well, most millennials are post grad school age now. Not that they
Right.
can't go to later age, but it's moved on.
Right. Well, do you see that changing, or are there any hints of that changing? Like, did like of people going to grad school between 35 and 40, right?
There's not quite as many, especially I can't speak to all grad school. I've not worked in the engineering or sciences space, for example. Uh, But in the business school space, you see some people go for executive MBAs, the traditional full time. I'm obviously not a spring chicken. I just said I worked 2 decades in admissions, and I had a career before that, so I've been around for a little bit. Um, it's it will constantly change. The schools are adapting to what Gen Z wants, and I'm sure Gen Alpha after that. I can't, I haven't looked much beyond that if they're even named after that. But point being, the schools are updating and kind of like this. Are what sort of programs? I mentioned the micro credentials and things like that. That might be
Right.
something that's more fitting in. That was something that the deans at this conference were talking about. Um, how do you finance? Goodness, I look at the price of school these days and think,
hmm
thank goodness I went through school over 20 years ago because it wasn't quite as intimidating.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. Like, my friends have kids, and what they're being told is like, essentially, if you just extrapolate the trend line 18 years and
Mm.
you want to have enough money for undergrad, you're going to need 700 grand.
Ouch.
And I'm just like, oh my God, maybe my kid, maybe my kid will go to somewhere else. Community college is great nowadays, right? No, it's just, yeah, I mean, I don't think that trend line will continue into perpetuity. I would be really surprised, but you never know. And certainly, I think that is definitely the part of the conversation we're seeing a lot more too, is like, there's a lot more emphasis on scholarships.
Hmm.
I think also we've gotten past this idea that scholarships are only for the most needy and everybody else shouldn't or can't apply.
Right.
And in fact, it's more like scholarships are kind of for everyone. And it's actually, I think in undergrad, it's something like half of all students have some scholarship support.
Right.
Um, I don't quote me on that. I don't know. I'm paraphrasing from something I saw, but it's like I think that will probably, even though MBA programs are elective, right?
Mhm.
So, a little less sympathy for scholarships than undergrad. I still think that will probably become a bigger part of it too.
Yeah, and each school is different, and this is I wish I had a list. Such a list doesn't exist, and there's no way to keep up to date with it. But part of your job as an applicant is figuring out which schools are going to offer scholarship, fellowship, work
Right.
on campus, whatever, and that can be a bit daunting task. I know
Mhm.
some schools, and I'm not going to name school names, but I
Yeah,
work
yeah,
with
of
hundreds of
course.
schools. But there's some schools that I work with where the admissions director is like, we basically give everyone as much money as humanly possible
Mhm.
because we want this, this type of student coming in. And there's others which are, we don't do any need based scholarship whatsoever. You have to come in academically and background top of the mark to get anything.
Right. Well,
So
and
it's
it's
all over.
and it's like, you've got to pay for the service, right? At the end of the day, like there's that again, it's elective, right? Nobody's making you get an MBA, so it is a different attitude.
I'll also one more thing on that. I remember thinking, oh, in-state tuition. That's gonna be great. When you start to look at public schools, like I worked at University of California, it wasn't that much different for in-state and out-of-state for an MBA program. Maybe for
Mhm.
undergraduate, that makes a big difference in other programs, but just be aware. You don't think that, oh, I live in Texas, I should only look in Texas. You're not going to get that much more discount necessarily just because you're a resident. It's a different ball game than undergraduate education.
Yeah, exactly. I also wanted to like so you had there are a couple of things that you said in the last 5 minutes that I want to touch on, but the big one you made this comment of like, what does Gen Z want? And out of their MBA programs, right? And to be honest with you, I don't know either, right? Like I have aged out officially, right? I'm 36 now. So I'm quite curious, like just from your conversations that you're having, like what is sort of the feeling about how Gen Z thinks about business school and what they're looking at for out of it?
All right. Well, that's a great question because I think that that's still a big question, not totally answered yet,
Hmm.
especially as they're just coming in. But the things that are very different. Um, No, definitely the concept of online. I mean, we lived through COVID. Gen Z lived through COVID at an age where they understood what was going on. Many of them.
Right.
So these online classes and things like that, that's normal. Um, Man, if you told me in the early 2000s you're going to have all these online classes, I'd be like, what are you talking about? That was my first job after my MBA was actually helping launch an online program. And man, did I get so much flack for that. Oh, you're doing online work. Well, that's not education. That's not, and that's an old grumpy Gen X attitude on that. And we often have this idea of what I did is the right way to do it. You can't change this all up. But Gen Z, they never knew a world without the internet. They never knew a world without Netflix and Hulu available. Everything I want to see,
Well,
it's there. So they're all
right. Well, I love when like you get those anecdotes, like people are like, you used to have to sit down at 6 p.m. every Tuesday to watch the show you wanted to watch. You couldn't just like watch it whenever you felt like it,
I'm
right? Like
enough
it's
to remember to have to get up and walk across the room to change to one of the other five channels that was available.
yeah. Don't forget to rewind the VCR. So it's all. I mean, I think that it's interesting because in a way, you know, like this is a hypothesis I'm just going to throw out there, and I'm sure it could be right or wrong. I don't mean anything by it, but I more think it's a great point of conversation. Gen Z is used to being able to learn anything that they want on the internet. There's also things like MIT Open Courseware and stuff like that. So as an MBA program, do you feel like you're competing with that? Are you competing with YouTube, right? Like and other things like that.
Sure,
Eh,
sure.
yeah.
And I think that part of you could absolutely today go and learn everything that you learn in an MBA just by spending a lot of time on YouTube. I'm not going to lie. The information's out there, but that's your dedication to doing it, et cetera, et cetera. So part of the educational,
Well, and then there's the structure of the like what are you studying when and why, and then there's the other part of the MBA program, particularly for the people that really want to go to GSB or Harvard or whatever, is the networking,
yeah,
right? That's what you really want, right? At least my friend who ended up going to Harvard School of Business, she was like, yeah, I mean, academically it was like she didn't say it was bad, but she basically like didn't sound like it was terribly difficult or that she was terribly impressed by the schoolwork itself.
hmm
But she said like, all the connections I made with the people was like the real value that I got out of it.
oh, absolutely, yeah.
And that's just one anecdote and, Harvard, I'm sorry. But also that's like you can't get that online, right?
No, that's true. I mean, you can build a community through an online program. That is absolutely true. I mean, we do it on Facebook every day. At least I do. I'm that age. I'm not on anything but Facebook, to be quite honest, and LinkedIn, of course.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, right. Yeah.
uh, but but yeah, it's being part of that club, if you will. People opening doors for you that are otherwise not going to be open for you. So that is a big part of it. Is the network and the opportunity to have those doors open for you. But so what we're seeing is kind of how you deliver classes different, how you give different
Mhm.
homework. I mean, I mentioned I was a high school teacher prior to going for my MBA. Um, and thinking back to that, man, the homework I gave my students could easily put that in Chat GPT today and have the answers out in 30 seconds. I use Chat GPT all the time. I'm going to be honest. I leave it open on my desk almost all day. And anytime I
Right.
have a question that's probably going to take me 5 or 6 Googles to find, I just go over to Chat GPT and say, or
Right.
if I'd like, no, I have a presentation to do, I will type out, this is what my presentation's about. I don't say make the presentation for me. I say, can you give me an outline of a way this would work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those sorts of things that are helpful for me to get my mind going. And I may use some of it. I may not use some of it. Um, but it's there. It's not going away. I remember the big debate
Oh, yeah.
in my era when I first started was, uh, you know, first few years of being an administrator, smartphones came out, and the
Mm.
debate was if the faculty wanted to ban them from their classroom
Hmm.
and Wi-Fi in the classroom where they could use Wi-Fi on their computer, and the faculty, many of them, we don't want this. Turn it off. Don't let them. We're like, you can't stop it. It's here. So you got to build your class and your methods around that.
Right. Well, and to me it reminds me of when I was in like eighth grade or something, like the TI-84 came out, like the graphing calculator,
hmm
and all the math teachers had a conniption because it could just do all the math for you. And so there's like the first year or two, everyone was like, we need to ban this and banned all the calculators. And then, by the time I got through high school, it was like, well, you're going to have a calculator whenever you want, so might as well let you use it and teach you around that, right? And I think ChatGPT, same conversation, basically. It's not going away. It's probably not, it's probably going to get significantly better in the next 5 years too. Um, and that is an interesting thing, right? I mean, certainly I have no doubt that like MBA programs are grappling with this because so is everybody else. But I'm curious, like, what you feel like the boundaries or guidelines that are coming about are, right? Like basically, how do you feel like AI is going to be handled by most MBA programs in 2025? Let's keep it time gated to 1 year.
Sure.
Um, yeah.
Well, a lot like what I just said. It's the faculty and the students learning how to use it in a way that's not quote cheating. Um, things like building outlines, finding the resources for your research. Again, in my day when I was an undergraduate, you had to go in these intimidating libraries to find things and then figure out how the card catalog even worked. Probably spend some time with the librarian saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I know I said that multiple times.
Yeah.
And just the speed and access to information and guiding you in that direction. Um, it's grasping how to take this access to so much information and what are you going to do? How do you formulate that? I mean, I do think there's probably going to be a bit more in class essay writing, maybe. Like you read a
Well,
case and
essay
evaluate
like
this case
essay tests in class.
in
Yeah.
the class or in a because if you let all your students go and do it, well, there are going to be the temptations to maybe not write the whole thing, but certainly get help on
Well, it's
faculty wanna have up in the brain. And as they're grasping this in the next year, I think that's one solution faculty are going to find is, yeah, I want you to do a case study write up, but we're going to have an hour and a half reserved in class that you are going to do that. Now they don't want to
mhm.
waste their time for that too, so there's going to have to be things that come up. I mean, this is on the admissions side specifically. I am absolutely certain there are people who turn in their application essay is Chat GPT work.
Oh yeah, somebody's already done it, or probably many people.
Yeah,
The thing though, I mean, at least in my opinion, because I just read a lot of like stuff online, is you can totally tell,
yeah.
at least right now with ChatGPT 4. What I've noticed is that Claude, which is I think Google's version,
Mm-hmm.
it writes a little differently. It also has its own style, but it writes a little differently. But like the AIs at the moment, you can read it and be like, that's definitely AI. AI loves to do this thing where it's like full sentence, comma, effect of the sentence, which is like something that like normal human beings never do, right? It'd be like Tom like bought blueberries from the grocery store, comma, a nutritious snack that he was looking for his like late nights or something. And you're just like, humans don't write like, right? So I think that it's, you gotta, I like what you said at the beginning that you use it for in your own life. You've got to let it be your brainstormer and outliner, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly for admissions essays, which are supposed to be coming from the heart, you should write it yourself.
Even when I started admissions back in the early 2000s, I will say I never truly believed that the essays were the authentic work of every single applicant. Now that sounds a
For
little
sure.
a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
negative, but even when I applied, and I like to think of myself as academic, having good academic integrity, I guarantee I had three or four people read my essay before I submitted it. I called my
Mhm.
smartest friends and said, "Hey, would you read this and tear it up and make sure it makes sense and do whatever needs to be done?" Uh, that's been going on since the beginning of time. At least, I think it should. That's why you have friends to edit. Um, little different now, and there's something going on in the and kind of the background right now. This taking it back to the GRE specifically, there is a writing section on the GRE, as you know. On the GMAT, there is not a writing section, and at first you may be like,
Right.
"Oh, well, that's great. I'll just go take the GMAT because it didn't have the writing section." Well, there's plenty of other hard stuff there, but um, this year, Harvard has announced if you take the GMAT for admissions, if you get approved for an interview, so kind of you got that through that first phase, you're going to have to go take another test for writing. I believe
Yeah.
MIT and was it Columbia? I think we're considering that. I don't.
Well, it's also that other test for writing is by the people that make the GMAT. So they just broke it out into a separate thing.
Yeah, and it's just the old test that the old writing section they used to have. It's just now a separate thing. And by the way, you do have to pay for it. You do have to go through the whole, you know, time of doing it, paying for it, everything else. GRE, pretty much you're one and done. You take the test, you got your 30-minute writing section. The schools say, this person wrote this essay in a closed and secure situation where they did not get help. And is that important? I hear from applicants. Is that really all that important? Absolutely. When you get out in the real world, how many times do you have to write on a daily basis? I spend so much time on email and whatnot, working with clients, and I got to sound intelligent, and I can't let AI
Well,
write all
and
my
you can't,
stuff.
yeah, you can't like feed the human context of like a 5 year long relationship with some with that you have with the dean of so and so school
Hmm.
to chat gpt to reply to your email like that's a long time coming. That's not going to be around for a while, right? That basically won't be around until you have an ai reading everything that you do, which is a whole nother thing, but we'll leave that alone. But yeah, like that's going to be interesting. I also think just in general, I think that there is so because I like unlike or unique to me in our conversation is that like I talk to a lot of undergrad admissions counselors and tutors and things like that because we have an ACT course and we're doing other things. And basically like there's a little bit of panic because a lot of people, a lot of like call them kind of high school kids now are graduating high school having used ChatGPT to get through the last 2 years and not learned anything.
Hmm.
And so then they're getting into college and college classrooms and the professors are like, you can't even write like a normal 5 paragraph intro, 3 big body paragraph conclusion essay.
Right.
How'd you even graduate? Right? Like what? So that's going to be interesting too, is like, if that eventually trickles to MBA programs or not. Obviously, it's self-selecting audience is a little different, but
So and I could hear the argument, oh well, the type career I'm going into, I'm not going to have to write that much or whatever. And I could make an argument against that. But I mentioned a couple times that I was a high school teacher. I didn't say what I taught. Surprise, I was a Spanish teacher.
oh, cool.
And I taught AP level Spanish, which meant they took the AP test given by ETS, by the way, my current company. And I was an AP test grader, but, the ability I was teaching my students to write those 5 paragraph essays that you were just talking about in Spanish, so in a language that was not
Mhm.
their own. The point here is when you're talking language, whether you're a native speaker or not of any language, there's two things that are production of language. One is writing and one is speaking. And there's listening and reading are the ones that come into you. Um, but production, the way that you speak, very related to the way that you write.
Mhm.
We all have some friends that are out there. I'm sure we all love them that just speak in circles and loops, and perhaps I have even a bit during this conversation. But you want to you're gonna if you especially if you get higher management level, you're gonna have to give presentations and speeches. And guess what? That's just the verbal form of writing. Your vocabulary, maybe you won't have to worry about the spelling of there, and there. Uh, yeah. But you will have to, sound intelligent to people who maybe you're going to invest in your company or something like that.
Yep.
You've got to build that language, and it's not just the writing; it's the speech too. So they're very related and
Yeah.
important as you go into the business world for sure.
Well, and that's kind of to get a little philosophical for a second. When I think about like what am I going to teach my kids someday, knock on wood, it's like, if you think about 5 years ago, not that
Hmm.
what was like the slam dunk career that if you went into college and got good grades at, like you'd be rich pretty much right away? Computer science, right? And now, 5 years later, not that long, like computer science, like entry level jobs, went from like 220K in the SF Bay Area in like 2022 to like 60K now.
Hmm.
And there's a ton of people that have computer science degrees that can't get jobs. And it's like, that rate of change, right, is not going to slow down. And so, how do you future proof yourself? And to me, it's like critical thinking skills and people skills,
Yeah.
right? At the end of the day, ChatGPT cannot give the presentation for you. ChatGPT cannot like get drinks with somebody that you have a good business relationship with, and like that's just they'll never ChatGPT will never be able to do that, right? Like, not for you. And so I feel like MBA programs at least will always have that to kind of rely on, right? You cannot
Sure,
learn these things
sure, and
from the internet.
and bring it just a little back to the admission side. I heard many times from
Hmm.
corporate recruiters, those that were hiring our students, thank you for being the first line of interviewing.
Right.
Whatever big company or small company you want to work for out there, they are looking for traits in you that it is the MBA or whatever program you go through in business school. It is the job of the school to provide you that next level of knowledge and that network and everything. But it is the admission department that is filtering through all the applicants to find those that have the skills that we're talking about right now, that have the skills
Right.
that can write, that have the skills that can speak intelligently and present or solve problems, things like that. More and more we hear schools talking about how can we really identify those soft skills. I've heard them both called soft skills and durable skills, which seem like opposite words to me. Um,
Yeah.
but
Enduring skills. Yeah. Yeah.
but that's one of the things they're looking at. And how are they doing that? They're doing that through your interviews. They're doing that through what you say in your essay, whether you wrote it on your own or not. It's at least your ideas coming out, hopefully. Um, and so that's a huge part. It's not just the GRE or your undergraduate GPA. They're looking for the personality that is going to represent them well. And so yeah,
Well, and it's also this idea, like the personality is going to represent them well, but it's also this idea of, you know, I how do you say this in a not I don't know, I'll just say it bluntly. Your dream is to find the next Steve Jobs, right? Your dream is to find somebody that really goes out and does something big and important in the world that everyone goes, oh wow, and then they went to blank school, right? Like that is probably not something you are only selecting for, right? Because I mean, it's kind of like trying to find lightning in a bottle, but it's definitely, a consideration.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's
Yeah.
I'd start. As you're going through this whole process, we talk about what are schools doing. Well, every school's going to do something different. They already do. I mean, I worked at I mentioned Thunderbird, where I hold my MBA, and it was focused on international work. So it's all about, do you understand global economics and sensitive to culture differences and things like that. Uh, UC San Diego, amazing school focused on more like biotech and engineering. And so I had to switch my mindset in admissions to, I'm not looking for necessarily globally aware, culturally aware folks. I'm looking for scientists and engineers that want to go on the business side of those industries. And
Right.
if I found an applicant applying to both of those schools, I'd have to be like, hey, what made you apply to these schools? Your fit is super important, both to the school because they want us, individuals who are interested in what they're teaching and the
Hmm.
network and things that they have. Um, but it's also super important to you. You don't want to go to Harvard or MIT or Columbia just because the name. I mean, I'd be honored to go to any of those. Well, and hundreds of other business schools as well. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
if they're not doing what it is, if they're not the path to what I want in my future and what my passion is,
Hmm.
you said you worked in the gaming industry. Well, there are some great business schools that probably have no connection whatever to the gaming industry. I would probably start
Oh,
with some
totally. Yeah.
schools. I would assume like USC, Southern California, probably a lot of.
USC is probably one of the only ones that like intentionally calls out that they do have connections to the game industry. Yeah. But it's more for me, I think about it like, um, if you want to do something that's like chemical engineering and MBA kind of combined,
Hmm.
right? And you want to like build a biotech company or whatever it is. Um, Harvard is probably not the most chemically engineering related business school out there. It just isn't,
Right.
right? Like like definitely the best. And I mean, we didn't really get into like tips for the new year, and I feel like we probably don't have time for all of them, but definitely think about it from the perspective of like your career specialty,
Hmm.
right? The number one business school for people that want to go into oil and gas is going to be totally different than the number one business school for people who want to be a startup founder, right?
Yep. If you want to go to oil and gas, I live in Texas. I can point you in the direction of several schools that are great in that, but you probably don't want to go to somewhere where there's not much oil and gas industry. Um,
Right. No, even if you go to Stanford GSB, there's gonna be like less than five people there in your class that are interested in oil and gas, probably. Like, don't quote me on it, but that's a guess. It's a guess I'm pretty happy with.
which brings me, I would say, to another point, which is you've got to do your research. Getting applying
Yeah,
for business school should not be something that you're just doing spontaneous. Now, in some people's lives, I get it. You lost your job. Hey, classes are about to start. There's a great school down the road. I'm going to go to that. Okay, that's possible,
great.
but
Yeah.
this is a life choice, and probably one of the biggest life choices ever, because it will define your career and somewhat yourself for the rest of your life. I chose my grad school. I looked for a good year and a half before I said signed on that dotted line. Yes, I'm coming there for school. You want to start early. Really research your schools. Make sure that you know what schools are a good fit. Make sure
Hmm.
you're thinking of your budget and what you're able to do and willing to do on that. Uh, so don't just assume, oh, hey, here we are in the end of October in 2024, and oh, I definitely got to start in September 25. Yes, it's possible, but you've already missed deadlines for some of the best schools out there. This is a
Right.
long process, and it should be. It is a life-changing thing.
Well, and also it's like, I mean, maybe some people do their best work with a tight deadline, but I would imagine that most people do their best work when they're really thoughtful and have time to really work on stuff, right? And particularly preparing for tests like the GRE and GMAT generally is at least 3 months if you're doing a good job of preparing. Um, so, listening to this episode at the beginning of 2025, if you're thinking about applying at the end of this year, right? At the end of 20, like for the fall 2025 season for the 2026 class, um, start now and start with the testing stuff, actually, in my opinion, because it's a bit of call and response, right? Like what scores you can get to in part determine what schools you can get to. And then also if you've got a school you want to get to, then you got to kind of get a score that at least gets you kind of in the range, right? And obviously scores are not everything. But it's certainly very, very hard to get into Harvard or Stanford with a, 300 GRE, right? It's just hard. It's a lot harder than if you had a 340. So it's it's very much like it's a I don't know, it's so corny, but it's like it's a journey. So like enjoy the journey, but also don't be rushed on said journey, or you'll be better off if you are.
I will tell you the worst thing that any applicant ever told me. Maybe not the worst. There's probably I could come up with some worse, but some and I was at a school where we would talk to applicants. Even if they were denied, and say, "Hey, can I talk to someone about how I can make my chances better for the future?" Our recruiters and admissions team would typically do that. Not every school will. I will tell you right now, they don't have the time. If they have 10,000 applicants and only take 1,000, they don't have time
Yeah,
to talk to counsel 9,000 people on that. But I've talked to people that work there, and they do agree on this. I had someone tell me at least once a year, uh, either they got rejected or they before they wrote an additional essay or whatever, hey, don't consider my GRE score too much because I didn't have time to prepare. What no, it comes every year. Like, oh, I was really busy and had to take my GRE really quickly before the deadline. What you are saying to me, translate to
Right.
admissions, is I don't care about doing my homework. I don't care about
Yeah, or
working
just
hard and
I didn't
strategy.
plan ahead. Yeah.
So that is one of the, you are showing your personality that I don't plan ahead and strategize what I need to do. So don't pay attention to my score. It's not good enough, but look at everything else I've done. I'm like, you just told me you don't like doing your homework.
Right. Well, and that's actually, if I've learned anything as I've kind of gone from being the hired to the hiring person in my career, it's that like, you don't ask interview questions like, one of the interview questions that I use that is really telling what the answers you get is like, can you tell me about a time where like you got negative feedback and like how you handled it? And the thing is, I don't actually care what the feedback was. I don't care if like you made a terrible mistake. What I want to hear is like what you did and then also like kind of what like listen to you talk about it, right? Did you think of it like a teachable moment or did you think of it like it was annoying and they were kind of wrong, but they yelled at you anyway, right? Like that's the context I'm looking for. And so when MBA admissions officers are doing the exact same thing, they're reading between the lines, and what they get from in between the lines is actually what they're looking for more than what you say, like explicitly. And that's a great example of that. If you're not thinking ahead enough to, know that you need 3 months to prepare for your GRE, start 3 months ahead of time, or even four, so you have an extra retake in there, right? You're That's a different type of person than somebody who did do all those things.
Yeah. There's another type person that I would see every year in the application process that, how do I put this? This is the time for you to put your best foot forward. Be proud of
Mhm.
your achievements. Be proud of what you've done, but be humble at the same time. Yes, I
Mhm.
did do this. I did do this. Not, yeah, I did this. I did that. And that comes out in an interview. And by the way, the interview is not a 1 30-minute thing or hour long thing. No, it starts the moment you contact a school and talk to a receptionist at the front desk, because I
Right.
guarantee they are watching you from every moment. And that may sound like a little big brother scary, but it is true. I certainly, there were people that did not get admissions to my school because when they came in, they were very rude to the receptionist.
Right. Well, it's just like when you go on a date and the person's rude to the waiter, right? You're like, oh, right. Like, it's telling.
Yeah, but you do want to highlight what you have done. I mean, this is your moment in your application to brag about yourself, again, humbly. Uh, but there are people out there like that are timid and don't want to say, yeah, I accomplished. Well, I was taught not to. I've heard this every year. No, this is the point. On your resume, put everything that you possibly ever did. If you got, I don't know that perfect attendance in high school would count, but it does say something about you. If you got
Right.
some sort of award or something along the way, uh, absolutely. Tell us. Also, it doesn't have to be at work. The thing that could, in business school, they love people that are willing to take chances and risks. If you like to jump out of airplanes, by all means, talk about that. It makes you a bit different, and something worth talking about. If you're a certified scuba diver,
Right.
by all means, include that somewhere in your application. It tells us more than you know. I used to say, and as a gamer, I did say this. We want to know in admissions that you do more than go to work and then go home and play video games all day. Now, if you're a competitive video game player and it's competition, by all means, I want to know about that. I had professional gamblers come in my program because it was interesting stuff. It made them interesting, but they came at it from an intellectual side.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've yet to meet a professional poker player that's not usually razor sharp, right? Like, because you've got to be to survive in that game. So yeah, and I mean, what you're getting at too, which I really love, and it's kind of just been a trend for a little while, and I'm sure it'll continue into 2025. Is this idea like when we were kids, we were raised to be, for lack of better words, like circles, not arrows.
Mhm.
We were raised to be well rounded, to do a little bit of sports and a little bit of theater, a little bit of math and whatever. And now it's like the total opposite. Well, not the like not the total opposite. We don't want you to be deficient in the other areas, but it's like we want the arrows now. We want you to be just absolutely diehard passionate about surfing and wanting to start a company related to surfing rather than, oh, I do a little surfing and I do a little like, math and like blah blah blah.
I think most admissions people, and I say most, are probably looking for a little more well-rounded. Not only
Mm,
can you play the stock market, but you can go and enjoy theater in the evening. That's just an example. You don't have to do that. Uh,
right.
when I was younger, I remember them saying, "Oh, all the extracurricular stuff, how important it is." Well, if it's not your passion, maybe don't just play football because you're built to play football. If your true passion is something else, follow your passion, but share your passion and show that that is something that makes you more interesting. And it doesn't have to be your career. It's something you do
Mhm.
on the side.
Well, and I think it's like, who are you, right? At the end of the day, even though an MBA program is about work, ostensibly, it they they're not looking for somebody who's like a drone either,
Oh,
right?
absolutely not.
And people who are drones generally like they usually do well, but not as well as the people that live interesting lives, right? Like, does Richard Branson like just work all day? Like, hardly, right?
Yeah, I'm sure he has a
Right?
boat and enjoys his travels. And, I mean, there's,
Right. Really likes windsurfing apparently, right? So there's like I think that those are the things also that like are kind of behind the curtains a little bit when you're like applying to a business school. It's like you lead with the resume, right? Like it is kind of like a work interview thing,
yep.
but a business school, unlike a job, cares about you outside of work a little
I'll
bit
give
more.
you an example right here. This was a number of years ago, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. I was in the running to be, I was associate dean of admissions for a very top business school, and
Cool.
I was in the top three. It was not the final selection, and that's fine. I'm happy where I wound up, but so they flew me out to the city where they were for round one, which my interview, this is not intimidating at all. Academic interviews are intense. It was at least 25 administrators slash faculty in, what was it? The Ritz-Carlton Hotel in this city, and me at one end and the other of them all in a circle basically around me, asking me questions for an hour and a half. Uh,
Oh,
yeah. So
sounds like a Hunger Games
I
panel
was working
almost.
with a headhunter that worked with them and was advising me, and so I did get invited back to the second round of interview, the final interview. So I guess I did okay in front of those 25 very intimidating individuals.
Right.
And she said the thing that they talked about most, that they really liked about you, because we all had the experience. We wouldn't have gotten invited to the interview without that. It was that I told them that just a few months prior, I sing as well. If you can't tell my beautiful voice here, I sing. Usually not solo. But I did a solo when I was living and singing with this group in front of about 3 or 4 thousand people in San Diego. And I told
Wow.
them that that was something I did. And that was the thing that got me the second interview, according to the headhunter, was they were amazed that you had, here you are, this business school administrator, and then you go out and sing this solo. in front of 3 or 4 thousand people. I was like, well, yeah, that's what I do on the side. They're like, well, that's what they really liked about you. It's like, oh, that's what made you stand out. So it's the same when you're doing admissions. When you see someone who's doing something, wow, that's really cool. And I've admitted professional football players, pretty well known ones. One I see quite regularly, still on ESPN.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
Professional baseball players, others, and that may be their special thing, but it's really interesting the mix they like to have in a program. So be you, show off who you are if you got something special like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love all of that advice, and I feel like this we're probably reaching kind of a good point to wrap up here. Do you have any kind of parting thoughts and either advice or trends or just other things to think about for our audience going into 2025 here?
Sure. To wrap up, I would say uh, prepare. So you're in good hands here to prepare. Do really well on the GRE. Um,
Hmm.
and take that time to find where you fit. And
Hmm.
if it's not, if you don't get into choice A, you should always have a plan B and plan C, maybe, because there are so many amazing schools. It's not just the top 10 that are worthwhile. There are so many out there. Find a number of schools that would fit you, what your goals are, your passions are, and what you want to do with your future. Um, Really will make you a lot happier in the long run to take the time to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Jay Bryant from ETS. And Achievable has a great online GRE course you can try for free by going to achievable.me and use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.